Hi, Amanda. How are you today? It's so wonderful to see you again. It's always great to catch up.
Absolutely. It's our only time to really get to hang out together. If we were living as neighbors, we would be together all the freaking time. I can already see it.
I know. I know. Now, today we've got a really interesting topic. And I think this is something that impacts most people who have experienced trauma. It's understanding the relationship between trauma and the inability to sleep.
Yes.
So, yeah. Do you want to tell us, can you introduce the topic for us? Tell us a little bit about it.
So the reason that I wanted to call this one the inability to sleep is because a lot of people don't understand what insomnia is. They think insomnia is just the complete blanket statement. You're not able to sleep no matter what you do. And when a lot of people are dealing with insomnia or with trauma related insomnia, is that they have a difficulty falling asleep and they have a difficulty staying asleep. This can be and this is a real problem for a lot of people. And so many of them don't realize that this is trauma related and that there are some things that you can do that'll make it really easy to deal with it. But we'll get to that.
Mm. Interestingly, when I was doing my research for the topic, and I don't know why it hadn't occurred to me before, but basically, as we've talked about before, the trauma actually interrupts our body's stress response system. And essentially, what we've got is that we're either in persistent hyperarousal or hypervigilance. And that actually is what affects our sleep patterns because we're in this hyper-aroused and hypervigilant state. And I don't know what possessed me, but I didn't ever make that link before I read it. And it makes so much sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about it, for somebody that has had some kind of a traumatic experience, specifically somebody who's been in, let's say, an abusive relationship, they lay awake a lot of times because they're afraid to fall asleep. They don't know what this person, this abusive person, is going to do. Even if that person has never been physically violent with them, that's not what abuse necessarily has to be. They can still live in this constant state of fear that if I fall asleep, so and so is going to get mad, or they're going to say something or do something, or they're going to make me mad. This is also really common with people who have experienced infidelity in their relationships for the same reason. I can't fall asleep until he or she falls asleep because that's when they get on their phone. That's when they start having these inappropriate conversations with somebody else.
Mm, mm. Interesting. Yes. So, do you want to talk about the symptoms, or would you like me to say something about the symptoms?
Well, I know that we can probably split this up. I'll cover a couple things and then I'll let you cover a couple things.
Okay, cool.
So, hypervigilance, you did touch on. That's constantly feeling alert and on edge. If you can't relax, you can't sleep. Flashbacks. So,
Mm,
people, and we did cover this a few episodes back in 2023, but when people are experiencing flashbacks that are really vivid and intrusive, they have sensory impressions of a traumatic event. This is going to stop them from falling asleep because they're going to have number one, this hyper arousal that's caused by the flashbacks, but also number two, they're going to have this fear of falling asleep because they're going to afraid that they're going to be afraid. They're going to lose any kind of sense of control that they have over what their mind does when they're sleeping. They're also going to have a whole lot of physical discomfort.
hmm
So there's that feeling restless, being tense,
Yep,
experiencing physical pain. These
yep,
are all going to make it very, very challenging for somebody to go to sleep, of course.
absolutely. Well, yeah, I can add to those. So, you've mentioned the difficulty falling asleep. There's also frequent awakenings. So you might get to sleep, but wake up several times during the night. Um, and also another one is early morning awakening, and that's something that I've experienced both of those. The three of them: difficulty falling asleep, frequent awakenings, and the early morning awakening. And I remember at one point in my life I had restless leg syndrome, so
Mm.
I just couldn't sleep because my legs were constantly sort of jittery. Um, and also, the last one I've got on my list is non-restorative sleep. So, when we get into that really deep sleep, that is when our body restores and our cells grow and our brain starts to also rewire and reconnect. And that's when the neuroplasticity happens. But um, yeah, so that's some of the sleep disturbances, and then the effects of that in the daytime. Of course, you're constantly exhausted.
Oh, yeah.
Like I lived years where I was constantly exhausted, irritable. Yay, yes, that was me. Very grumpy all the time, and difficulty concentrating. I found that
Right.
as well.
Right.
Because if your brain's not resting and your body's not resting, well, then it's impossible to really focus during the day.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
those are
And
some
then
of the symptoms.
another issue there is you find it difficult to stay awake during the day. If you're not sleeping at night, you can sit there at your desk at work. I cannot tell you how many times I fell asleep like this with my
Yeah,
hand on my face, just propping my chin up, out cold for like 2 or 3 minutes at a time. You're still not getting
yeah.
decent sleep then.
No,
Yeah. You were
no.
talking about the deep sleep. If you ever sit there and watch somebody else as they're sleeping, they go into what we know as REM, rapid eye movement. And that's when they're dreaming. That's when their brain is doing all of this work. If you're not reaching REM sleep, if you're not dreaming, you're not doing the work that your brain needs to do.
Yes, exactly. That's when our brain processes everything, makes understanding of the day's events and how those events of that particular day relate to our feelings, our thoughts, previous events. Yeah, REM sleep or REM sleep, as it's known, is so important.
Right.
That
And
yeah,
all
for
of this stuff
restorative sleep,
and all of this stuff can really affect your relationships in a big way.
absolutely.
Yeah. When you're
Yeah.
not getting
So
sleep,
let's
you
go
do
to
get
some of the
irritable.
effects then. Let's go to some of the effects. So, like short-term effects, what I have here, and hopefully you can add to this, is mental health.
Mm.
So it exacerbates things like depression, anxiety, and PTSD symptoms.
Right.
So that's scary stuff. If you're not sleeping and you're starting to go down that abyss of depression, that's not good. That's not good.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
Uh,
you mentioned irritability earlier. That's another big one. And you're going to start being irritable with other people in your life, whether they're doing anything to actually irritate you or not. You're going to perceive it as being an irritation and you're going to start snapping at these people. I've done
yeah.
that. I'm sure you probably have too.
Oh, yes. My
What
daughter,
oh,
Mum, why are you so grumpy? I'm not. I'm not grumpy.
so what about cognitive impairments? You mentioned memory.
Yeah,
So what else can be affected by this? It's a lot of stuff.
there's a
Like,
lot of stuff. So, um, well, in terms of actually, this brings me to my next point, which was daytime functioning. And it's decreased productivity. So if your memory is being affected, that's part of your working memory, which is what allows us to do our activities, read a book, listen to music, have a conversation, do our work, our paid work, or washing the dishes and putting the washing out. So all of those skills, those cognitive skills that are related to our daily living tasks are impaired. And if you combine that with depression or anxiety, well, then you're a bloody basket case because you can't do the things that you want to do.
absolutely. And one of the things that I've noticed is that if I keep a list of things that I need to get done in a certain day, it helps me to keep on track, even if I'm somewhat sleep deprived. But if I don't have something written on my list, I completely forget to do it. I cannot think that far in advance. There is no decision making abilities. I have no focus. I cannot learn something new. I have what a lot of people would refer to as ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The hyperactivity is me trying to keep myself awake and going.
Yeah.
The attention deficit disorder is my inability to focus because I lack sleep. So a lot of people that have been diagnosed with ADHD are actually trauma survivors who are experiencing a lot of the symptoms and stuff that we've discussed in previous episodes, and the inability to sleep.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I remember a couple of years ago when insomnia was, it just ruled everything in my life. I really became very, very unwell because it was so extreme. And I'm doing a longitudinal study here on cognitive um, decline and dementia. And so I'm part of the university study. There's thousands of us here in Tasmania doing it. And each year they send us cognitive tests to do, and we just do them online. And this particular time when I was really sleep deprived, I couldn't even do the first 3 or 4 tasks. And I became so depressed because I thought, what's going on here? I can't even do a simple cognitive test um, that is indicative of whether I've got dementia. And then I started going down this rabbit hole of, oh my gosh, I'm becoming demented. And yeah, it was
Ooh.
really awful. Like I'd lost all that executive functioning, the capacity to problem solve, the capacity to think critically, the capacity to make decisions, like you were saying. It was awful, awful.
That is a
So,
lot to put on your plate all at once.
yeah,
That's a lot. My
yeah,
goodness. Plus, one of the other issues with being sleep deprived is that you have a reduced reaction time. So, not only can it increase the risk of accidents and injuries while you're driving, but those rabbit holes, they get a whole
ex-
lot deeper and you can fall a whole lot harder.
absolutely, absolutely. So then let's actually, that's an interesting one because the daytime functioning. So, I talked about the decreased productivity. We've mentioned relationship difficulties, and you just mentioned something about accidents. And that is really one of the things about insomnia and its impacts is that you can have an increased risk of accidents. And it's not just car accidents, it's at
Tripping down
home,
the stairs. Yeah.
tripping up the stairs. That's my favorite. I'm really good at that.
Yeah. Me too. My whole life. Yeah.
Bumping into doors, like the amount of times I've ended up with bruises up my arm and people go, what's wrong with you? I just bumped into the door again.
I had
I
that
didn't see
problem.
the hole in front of me.
I had that problem so bad for so long that people suspected for a little while that I had something called EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is something where you have hyperextension of certain joints and certain issues with clumsiness. I was so bad. And it was not EDS, it was a false diagnosis. I was sleep deprived.
Yeah, yeah.
Another thing
It,
that I've learned about sleep deprivation is that it can cause an increase in appetite and weight gain. And those
yeah,
two, of course, go hand in hand. And it disrupts your hormones that regulate your hunger and your feeling of being full.
exactly. Yeah. I think it's something to do with the pituitary gland in our brain, if my memory serves me correct. But then again, it might not because, I have been sleep deprived. But yeah, no, it's true. What you're saying is absolutely spot on. There is that part of our brain that is affected when we are sleep deprived that influences our hunger signals. Yeah,
Right. Right. And these are just the short term consequences that we've been talking about. There's long term consequences for this stuff too.
absolutely. Do you want me to start off?
I'll let you take it away.
Woohoo. So, yeah, look, in terms of health consequences, what I found was the risk of cardiovascular disease actually skyrockets. So, heart attack, stroke, um, you know,
High blood
plaque
pressure.
on the heart, you name it. It's crazy just how connected it is to insomnia. Things like obesity and diabetes.
Yeah.
And then we've talked about the cognitive decline, and that can be a long-term effect. It can be a very serious cognitive decline and also chronic mental health conditions. So
Yeah.
it's pretty bleak if you don't get it under control.
Right. It can also weaken your immune system. It makes you more susceptible, of course, to infections and illnesses, but also things like Crohn's disease and lupus. We really don't
Yes.
want that. It can cause worsening anxiety and depression. And it's a major factor in the inability to treat bipolar disorder.
Mm,
It will absolutely make that worse. But probably the scariest one for me was a decreased lifespan.
yeah.
There have been studies that have suggested that long term sleep deprivation can shorten your lifespan by several years.
Of course. Of course.
And
Yeah.
you know,
Sorry, I was just thinking of a study that I researched many, many years ago, and it was looking at a case study of a guy. I think his surname was Tripp. It was a DJ, radio DJ. Years and years ago, they did this event where he was up for like 48 hours or something doing some program, and he was so sleep deprived, he became so ill. I wish I could remember the name of the study now, but that was probably one of the original studies that led to a lot of the sleep deprivation work and research. Yeah, I think it was in the 60s.
that's amazing. I'm glad that they were able to start that research back then. I mean, we're still taking some time to catch up to where we are now, and there's still a lot of play with the information that we have because of course the severity can uh, be different based on how long you go sleep deprived, what your individual differences are, how you're resilient you are, all that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
can you remember what is the longest amount of time you've ever gone without sleep?
I would say easily I can remember a period where it was probably up to 72 hours where I was probably getting micro sleeps, where you sort of nod off for 5 seconds and wake up again.
Right.
But yeah, I was so hyper vigilant and so hyper aroused that there was nothing that could bring me down. It was pretty intense. What about you?
Ooh, the longest I ever went without sleep is somewhere around the um, severe levels and somewhere around the this may kill you levels. And a lot of people don't realize that going without sleep for long periods of time can absolutely end your life. The
Oh
longest
yeah.
I ever went without sleep was, as best as I can figure, 8.5 days.
Wow.
And that was during my trafficking. It was part of the torture and abuse that I went through.
Yeah.
It's insane to think about it now because looking back, I did not know these numbers. I did not know this information back then. It could have killed me. I think it
Yeah.
very nearly did, but I wasn't with it enough to really know that at the time. I was hallucinating heavily. I thought I was asleep when I was stumbling through the house. I didn't know where the stairs were. I didn't remember that we had an attic and I was fascinated by the square in the ceiling. Really weird stuff. It's like being on acid, and I've never
Oh,
been on acid.
completely. Completely. Yeah, look, I've just found the thing about that guy, and I'll mention it in a minute, but um, I think what you're saying there is just how serious it is in terms of death. And in war situations, they actually use sleep deprivation as a form of torture, and people have died.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and one of the things that I want to do at the end of this episode, I'm going to include it in the show notes because I feel like it's really important to have this in the tool bag. But there are certain questions that a therapist might ask if you talk to a therapist about your issues with sleep deprivation. So I'm going to
Mm.
include all of those specific questions in the show notes so that people can start to write this stuff down. If they do seek out professional help, they'll already have this information handy. They'll hopefully have their answers prepared before they ever go in there, and they'll have an extra tool in their tool bag. But if they don't seek professional help, they'll at least know where they're standing.
Exactly. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So can we talk about some of the strategies to overcome insomnia?
Yes, absolutely. My favorite part of the episodes.
Well, of course, there's one that we always go to, and that is therapy.
Yes.
And looking at trauma focused therapy like CBT, so cognitive based therapies, where they're trying to change our thought patterns and our beliefs and perceptions around the things that are causing us to have inability to sleep. And also EMDR, and that's something I think I mentioned recently, the eye movement um, strategy. And I'm currently going through that myself, and that
Yes.
specifically is to address traumatic memories and reducing that hyper arousal. So I'm not in that hyper aroused state, but there are still some memories, traumatic memories that I'm dealing with that I want to get out of here, out of my brain to,
Yeah.
allow me to have my best life as I continue on. So it's really important if these are recurring nightmares that you're having, or the insomnia has got to such a point that it's unbearable. I would highly recommend CBT and EMDR if you can
Right.
afford that therapy.
And for anybody who's wondering, I've also been through EMDR and it's amazing. But EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So it's really important to understand that this isn't some mumbo jumbo letters that we're just throwing out there because it's like a medication that you can't pronounce. This is something that's very real. And you can look it up and learn more about it online if you're scared of it. Find out information before you talk to the therapist if you feel like that's what you need to do.
And look, I've had two different therapists working with me. I did it for the first time about 10 years ago. And the therapist that I saw at that time was only just being trained in it.
Mm.
And also, we're talking 10 years ago. So at that time, the research in the area was still limited. They were still discovering what it was, how it impacted on the brain, and those traumatic memories. So I actually ended up being re-traumatized in that
Mm.
situation. And it really threw back my um, recovery process a number of years. However, I found a new therapist last year, and we've done, I think, 3 or 4 sessions so far. And just in that time frame of, I think we've done it over about 6 months. So I've taken my time doing it. Um, I've just gone through this radical change of feeling great and much better about myself. Those traumatic memories are no longer traumatic, and they no longer keep me awake at night, which is just amazing. So, how's that for a plug? Um, but it depends on the therapist, is what I'm trying to get at. And it depends on their training, and it depends on how the rapport that they establish with you as their client, and ensuring that you, as the client, make sure that you're in the driver's seat. Because, like my therapist has said, you ready? Shall we do X, Y, Z? And I go, no, I'm not ready to do that yet. I want to deal with this stuff over here first. And
Smart.
I
Being an
feel
advocate for yourself.
absolutely it's so important. And I think the only person who knows you the best is you.
Yeah.
You cannot allow a therapist or a doctor or some other professional to tell you what's best for you. They can advise you, but ultimately, you know yourself best, you know your body best, you know your mind best, we hope. Um, and that it's so important for you to have agency in any therapy that you do.
Yeah. And it's also, one of the things I tell people all the time is that when you find a therapist, it's kind of like finding a good tour guide. They
Totally.
can't do the work for you. You have to be the one to do the work. But if you're not ready to go down a path, you have to tell your tour guide, or they're going to be wandering halfway down that path without you.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So, some of the other
Okay.
ways to be able to treat it yourself.
So Sleep hygiene. So establishing a really consistent sleep routine. It's so important. Go to bed at the same time every night.
Subscribe for more
Or if you're a
content.
shift worker or whatever, go to bed at the same time. Make sure that you have a sleep-friendly environment. No phones, no tablets, no laptops, nothing electronic in your room.
Right.
Um,
There's so many studies about being exposed to blue light and how that can trick your brain into thinking that it's still daytime, and it can
exactly.
absolutely disrupt your circadian rhythms. Put that stuff down, pick up an old-fashioned book. I've written a few, you've written a book. People can grab our books if they were looking for a book that they haven't read yet.
And the biggie, no TV in the bedroom.
Yep.
How
Yep.
many people, and I was guilty of this in the past, TV in front of your room, go to fall asleep in front of the TV, TV's going in the middle of the night when they used to finish, midnight or whatever. And you'd wake up and it's
Yeah, all the snow reminds you of the scene from what is it, Poltergeist? They're here.
so that's really important. We're running out of time. So, and also relaxation techniques. One of the things actually, my acupuncturist put me onto this is at night, half an hour before you go to bed, get a bucket of really warm to hot water, add some salt, and I've been using Himalayan rock salt, and apparently that takes out all the impurities out of your body and allows your body to relax, but it also does something to the brain. I can't remember what it does to the brain, but I tell you what, it works, because when I have been recently, I've been doing a lot, and so I've been hyper aroused. And then I do that and I go to bed and I sleep so soundly, like
Yeah.
nothing can wake me up.
Yeah.
So that's important.
I find a lot of that when I do an Epsom salt bath before bed.
Yes, yes.
Like my whole body, everything but the
Yes.
hair and the face. I don't
That's
want salt
it.
on my face.
Perfect. Now, very quickly, medication. So, some people do take medication. I've opted for natural things like melatonin and I think it's St. John's wort. But again, any of those things, check with a medical practitioner first. Don't just go to the pharmacy and get that. Exercise, so lifestyle changes, exercise, healthy eating, stress reduction techniques, support network. These are things that we've talked about before, but it all relates, doesn't it? Seeking
Absolutely.
support from friends, family, support groups. And lastly, those self-care strategies. Do things that are relaxing, mindfulness, yoga, journaling, spending time in nature.
Enjoy your hobbies.
Yeah.
Painting.
So
doing a
I think
puzzle.
that's so important. It's so important. So I've rushed that last bit. I do apologize.
No, you're good. I think you're amazing. Yeah. And I can't even really add much to this other than, make sure that your bedroom is a sleep friendly place. Make sure it's dark and quiet. Make sure it's at a good temperature for you. If it's too hot or too cold, you're not going to be comfortable and you're not going to fall asleep that easily. And I love that you touched on the melatonin, because that is my drug of choice. I have been a very big proponent of melatonin since I was a flight attendant, and my sleep schedule was all over the place every single day. So that was nuts. Yeah. Melatonin was my best friend for a very long time.
So I suppose in conclusion then, inability to sleep, it's definitely related to trauma. We can do something about it. Let's have hope, because it is possible. It is definitely possible to work with this, seek help, and all the best, because we've both been through it. We know how bad it can be. We know how disruptive it can be, but look at us now. We're running a podcast that must say we're doing okay.
Subscribe for more content.